Hello, friends. Dr. David Katz, another edition of COVID Reality Check. And as I get better at these, they should get shorter. This one should be very short on a very specific topic, the importance of dose. And I will provide the link. My colleague, Dr. Daria Long, and I did a piece on Medium addressing this issue. But let me just sum up a critical issue here. And by the way, this is relevant to the whole discussion of mask use. And I will also put a link to my latest column on to mask or not to mask below this. But even if you're not concerned about getting COVID because you're young and healthy, and my view has been young, healthy people for the most part can get this, get over it, be immune, and frankly help the rest of us get back to normal. And I put myself in that camp. When I went to the front lines for a little bit, I wasn't all that concerned about getting it. Didn't particularly want to, but on the other hand, if I got it, I thought it would be fine. But one of the things that mask use can do is reduce the dose of exposure. And that matters. That matters even if you're someone who actually wants to get it and get over it. And let me explain why. By means of an analogy. So let's talk about a compound. Let's talk about a security force defending that compound, and let's talk about an assault on the compound. And we'll do 3 scenarios, A, B, and C. Scenario A, it's your compound, you have your security force defending the compound, and your compound is assaulted by a ragged band of thugs with very poor armaments. They're fewer in number than your security force. They're not as well armed as your security force. And the outcome is exactly as you'd expect. Your security force repels them, and you were barely aware that they were even there. There's no harm to your compound. And it shows up somewhere on a report, oh, by the way, but it's trivial. Scenario B, same compound, same security force. You're now assaulted for whatever reason. You're in a dangerous part of the world. You're now assaulted by a larger band of enemies who are armed about as well as your own security force. Well, of course, you've got the upper hand because you've got home turf advantage. You're defending your compound. You repel them, but this time there was a little bit of injury involved. So, they did some damage to the outer wall. Maybe some members of your security force were injured. This is not trivial. This is more than a line in a report. This will require a little bit of recovery, but you'll be fine. Your compound is fine. You repel the enemy. That's scenario B. Scenario C, same compound, same security force, massive army assaults you. 100 of them for every one of you. And frankly, they're very well armed. Well, this time you are overrun. They're over your walls. They're inside your compound. Your security force is destroyed, and maybe you survive, maybe you don't. But either way, the injury is severe. So what does this have to do with COVID, masks, immunity? The compound is your body. The security force is your immune system, and the assaulting enemy is the virus. And this is really how it works. There are 3 key components in infection. There's host, agent, environment. Host is you, or the compound. The agent is the infecting agent, so in this case, SARS-CoV-2. And then the environment is the set of circumstances that mediate the interaction between host and agent. And one of the critical considerations there is dose, for exactly the simple reasons in that analogy. Your immune system really does operate a lot like a security force. And so you can repel the virus without even knowing it's there if you're exposed to very few viral particles. You actually kind of sop it up before it ever even gets into the inner parts of you. You sop it up with something called secretory IgA. You react to it with T lymphocytes. It may not even produce measurable immunity. On the other hand, if it is a larger exposure, some of the virus gets in your bloodstream. You now need more armaments to repel it. You're going to make measurable antibodies. And then, of course, in that third scenario, we've all heard the anecdotal reports of healthy young professionals working in the ICU or the emergency department who have died, and we've all wondered why. Well, one of the reasons may be that they had a massive exposure dose. They were doing procedures in the ICU on people infected with COVID, and they inhaled a lot of viral particles. And so there is some point at which it doesn't matter how well made your compound is, it doesn't matter how robust your security force is, if the invading army is so overwhelming you lose the battle. And so we saw some of that. So one of the potential roles for mask use is to reduce the dose of exposure, right? And again, I wrote today about the relevance of mask use and why it just makes sense. And it makes sense certainly if you don't want to get exposed to the virus, but it can make sense even if you don't mind getting exposed to the virus because you think you can get safely through it and you want to become immune. But even if you do that, it's best to do that with a minimal exposure dose. I'll leave the gist of the argument, the bulk of the argument about masks to the column, and I'll just link to it. But this is why exposure dose matters, and why one of the things we can do to defend ourselves against COVID is control our dose of exposure. All right, I will be back with more reality checks as the circumstances warrant and my schedule permits. Stay safe.